Good afternoon. I'm Jim Plummer, the Dean of the Engineering School, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this afternoon. We're here to celebrate Morris Chang as one of the engineering heroes, and this is a program that's been going on for 3 years now. We have about 28 or 9 engineering heroes, and these are people who have a strong affiliation with Stanford. Many of them are our graduates, others are faculty who've served here for a while, but they're people who changed the world in various ways. So we'll talk a bit more about Morris in just a second, but let me begin by recognizing several other people who are here. John Hennessy, who is president of Stanford University, also an engineer, and and in just a couple of minutes, Jensen Huang will get up and make a couple of remarks about Morris as well. And Jensen is also an engineer, in fact, a Stanford engineering graduate. So unlike many of our previous engineering hero...
My wife also.
I'm going to get the selfie, right. Selfie. That was actually in my next paragraph here, but anyway, but I'll do it again. Good. So I also wanted to note that most of our Engineering Hero events actually have been evening events, but this one is actually being held as part of a regular Stanford class, the Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders class, and so we're delighted to have all of the students who are part of that class here to help us celebrate with Morris this afternoon. We have also a number of Tsmc executives here. We're delighted to have all of you with us, and we also have a number of people from the Global Semiconductor Association, including Jody Shelton, who was helpful to us in organizing this event as well. So the way we're going to proceed this afternoon is that the main event will be a conversation between John and Morris. We'll leave time at the end for questions for those of you in the audience who might have interesting questions or comments to make. But I did want to say a couple words about the Engineering Heroes program before we do that. So as I said, there are roughly 29 people we recognize to this point as heroes of the School of Engineering. The latest class of people includes the founders of Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Sally Ride, who was an astronaut and a proponent of science education, and historically people like Fred Terman, Bill Hewlett, Dave Packard, and Vint Cerf are also on our list of engineering heroes. As you go out the auditorium at the back, to the right there's a wall there that has a plaque actually for each of our engineering heroes. So Morris is a Stanford PhD in electrical engineering, and since you got me off track, I forgot the paragraph. So I did.
I'm sorry.
I did want to recognize not only your wife Sophie, but also Jensen's wife Lori. And we're delighted that Lori could also be with us. So Morris is a electrical engineering PhD from Stanford, and Jensen will say a bit more about him, but he is, I think, best known worldwide, really well known worldwide, for transforming the semiconductor industry. And it was in some sense, a single idea he had back in the 1980s that made this big transformation. And at that point in time, companies that designed semiconductor silicon chips and so on, by and large had their own fabrication facilities, big factories, so they would design them and make the chips. And Morris had this key insight that, maybe with these factories getting to be as expensive as they are, perhaps we could actually share the manufacturing facilities and enable more people to build these things that perhaps couldn't afford to build their own semiconductor factories. So that was the origin of Tsmc, which is the company that today is clearly the world leader in building chips for what are called fabless semiconductor companies. Now, the consequence of that has really been transformative because not only did it result in lower costs for many companies, but it resulted in a wave of creativity and innovation because people could now start a company designed to design semiconductor chips and do it with a few people and count on a manufacturing arm at TSMC to actually build the components that they would think about designing. So he transformed in a very real way the semiconductor industry, and I'm sure John will talk a little bit about that with him this afternoon. So with that brief introduction, let me ask Jensen Huang, who is a graduate of the also electrical engineering department here at Stanford, just to say a few words because he knows Morris really quite well, and he was going to say a few words about his relationship with him.
Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, both Jim and John, Professor Plummer, Professor Hennessy, that is, excuse me, were both of my professors. And I don't know if any of you have been so fortunate to have been taught by either of them, but I am rather the product of your work. So if you're...
And you don't hold it against us.
So this is what it looks like when we grow up.
Okay, we did okay, Jim.
Morris, the world is full of successful people, frankly, but heroes are rare. And I think that we understand the difference between the two. There is a difference between success and impact. And I'm really glad that this is partly a class, because I think that Morris, his career, his philosophies, Tsmc, its strategies, its core values, is absolutely a study in industrial revolution. There is no question about it. And all of you who are interested in starting companies, changing the world, building things that matter, this is a wonderful study in that. Impact. There are very few companies that I know, that any one of you know, in fact, who has had a greater impact on society as TSMC. When I met Morris almost 20 years ago, the concept of building semiconductors, the concept of building a chip, starts with build a factory. The first thing you do is find R&D engineers, find enough money to build a factory, and if you have any money left, you would actually build a new application, a new chip that mattered. What Morris did with TSMC, his insight, was instead of being a product company, TSMC would be a platform company. It would build no products. It would enable other companies to build products. That insight, although so clear now, potentially one of the most sustainable semiconductor manufacturing business models going forward, the foundry business model, was absolutely unclear then. If you look at their impact today, over $30 billion in sales, almost 1,000 customers. Instead of manufacturing one or a few products very, very well, they manufacture umpteen thousand products at a time. This is a company that manufactures, that makes something that I have utmost confidence right now as I speak that every single person in this audience has in his possession. This is the only company that I know that at this moment there's something in your possession right now that is manufactured by them. I believe that to be a test that will pass. Whether you have an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy or an iPad or whatever it is, of all of the companies you know in the world, this is the only company that currently has something they make in our possession right now. There are no others. So there's basically Air and TSMC. I believe that passes the test.
Is that by Confucius?
I believe that passes the test of impact. But what's really amazing is this. What's really truly amazing is this. I met Morris when I was quite young, and in fact, I've known Morris my entire company career. NVIDIA today wouldn't be here nor the other 1,000 fabless semiconductor companies wouldn't be here if not for the pioneering work that TSMC did. And the pioneering work is not semiconductor manufacturing. The pioneering work is the strategy of semiconductor manufacturing. They decided there would be a platform company. And in that platform company description, technology matters, capacity matters, pricing matters, delivery commitments matter. But the one thing that I took away from our meeting, and I tell everybody this, almost 20 years ago, was when I went to see him in Hsinchu, my walk-away message was one thing. This is a company that had technology, they had capacity, their wafer prices were relatively low, they promised to deliver on time. But my takeaway, because it said so in the brochure, it said so in all of my conversations with Morris, and it says so in everything he said over and over again, was what's going to make TSMC great is integrity and trust. And it sounded at that time, when I first met you, Morris, and don't take this wrong, sounded a little cliche, because everybody says that. But here's the fundamental difference between what he said and what he meant and why it was so important to TSMC. If you are a platform company, and you are a platform by which other companies' dreams are built from, if they can't trust you, you cannot be their platform. It's no different than the ground we stand on, a foundation we stand on, a continent we build, we immigrate to. If you can't rely on the fundamental foundation of that country, that infrastructure, that platform, you can't build an ecosystem above it. 20 years later, TSMC is not only a great company, I've already talked about its impact, but its business philosophy has become so foundational to an entire industry, whether it's EDA companies or IP companies that are in the audience or fabless semiconductor companies. There are no industry, no company, no products that I know of that TSMC is not somehow involved in. And it came from that singular vision that trust and integrity was foundational to their business. Let me just tell you a couple of stories. I've known Morris a long time, and I have a lot of business stories, but they're not very interesting. I have some personal stories that I think you'll find interesting, and it says something about his commitment and his courage. Hard to tell which one is which at the moment as I tell you the story. You decide. I think it was 1999. You will know the date, but I think it's like 1999. And it was a Friday afternoon. I got a phone call. My admin says Morris would like to drop by to see me on a Friday afternoon. And it was like my last meeting, and I was expecting TSMC sales to accommodate him, but he showed up by himself. It was him, his pencil, and his black book. Every time he pulls out his black book, it always sent chills through me. Not because he needed it. For everybody who knows him, he's impeccable with numbers. He's impeccable with numbers. He probably still remembers how many wafers I needed that year. But he dropped by and he wanted to see me. And we talked, and he asked me about business and the new products and my wafer needs for the year coming, and he wrote it down. We had a nice chat, and he left. Nobody at TSMC knew he came. I found out later that he was checking up on his customers, and in this case, it was me, and he was on his honeymoon. And I am one of the few people in the world that can say I was with Sophie and Morris on their honeymoon. That's my first story. I can't tell if it's a story of commitment or courage. Hard to say. I wanted to pick a good story that exemplifies, or both. My second story was, this is just a few years ago, and usually Morris sends an email and says he'd like to chat, and then we talk on the phone. And he had an announcement, and this announcement is that he is going to have a career change. He is going to be the CEO of Tsmc again, and at first I was happy for him. I pretended to be happy for him, and the first thought was, isn't there a driver's license that you need to be a CEO of a company? And he's turned 75. This is a guy who can write on his resume, when I was 75, I applied for a job as a CEO and got it. And
Who was the chairman of the board?
And I think that there are many CEOs in the world. There are many successful people in the world, and we all love what we do, and we love what we built. But very few people at the age of 75, or maybe it was 76, comes back to take on a massive company with global scale, with just in the middle of industrial revolution, which is during the mobile revolution. And not only that, he delivered what I would estimate to be the best 5 years of his career. And it's a little bit like Jack Nicklaus 2 weeks ago saying, you know what, I think I'm going to finish all the rounds of the Masters and win it. So this is an extraordinary, don't forget, being a CEO, as you know, of a large enterprise is mentally, physically challenging. I mean, this is a full contact sport. And to do it now and to do it the way that you've done is really, really extraordinary. Morris, I want to say on behalf of everybody here that we've seen a lot of success over the years, but we've never seen impact like what you've made. And on behalf of all of us, you're my hero.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, after that, I'm not sure what else we have to talk about.
That's right.
But let's start with the point that Jensen made, the tremendous impact that TSMC has had. Not only the creation of the fabless semiconductor industry that I think couldn't exist without that leadership, but also the tremendous impact it had on the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing and really being the spearhead for the growth of that industry. Did you anticipate those kinds of changes when you began the company? Did you think you could have that kind of impact around the world?
No, not at all, John. Actually, the very idea, the new business model, the pure play foundry business model, now everybody thinks that it was a pretty clever idea. But at the time, it was really a solution that was looking for a problem. Because as Jensen said, it was meant to be a platform. The problem was that at the time, nobody needed that platform. There were very few fabless companies in existence at that time. There were maybe 20-some fabless companies. Now, even those fabless companies did not think that they needed a TSMC. But they felt that they would rather go to Toshiba, NEC, Hitachi, Fujitsu, or even Intel or TI for fab service, foundry service. Now, of course, I mean, those big guys, the Japanese companies, the Intels and TIs, really didn't want them, you know. And they would make wafers for the little fabless companies only at a very steep price, not a financial steep price, but the price of wanting their designs for their own sales, for their own product sales. But still, we were not trusted enough, our technology was not trusted enough that they would come to us. And the big companies obviously didn't need us. Now, so it was a solution waiting for a problem to happen. Now, the problem happened pretty quickly in the early 90s. And I think that our existence certainly helped to accelerate the formation of a lot of fabless companies. There were maybe 25 fabless companies in the whole world in 1985, 86, and then 10 years later, there were 400, 500 fabless companies. And some of the big ones were started in that period, in that 10-year period.
Yeah. I mean, having worked in a fabless company, been involved in starting two of them, one before TSMC that had to do exactly as you said, go form partnerships with the big players who this was not their primary business, and then forming one at Theros with TSMC. It was night and day.
Yeah.
Completely different kind of experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. I
so
know.
talk about the impact on Taiwan as well. I mean, the catapulting of Taiwan into the semiconductor manufacturing business in a big way.
I think in many ways we were the first in Taiwan. We were not the first semiconductor company in Taiwan. Taiwan had other semiconductor companies before TSMC started. But we certainly became the most successful semiconductor company in Taiwan after a few years, after only a few years. And also, I think that we really set a model, I hope, for Taiwan in corporate governance, in innovations. Almost 99% of Taiwan companies operate with hair-thin gross margin. Gross margin 4 or 5%, and they don't have money for R&D. They don't even have money for sales marketing, for heaven's sake, with 4 or 5% gross margin. And I believe, were the first company that showed them that to be a world-class company, to be a real successful company, you needed to have R&D, you needed to have good sales marketing, and because you needed to have R&D, your gross margin would have to be in the 40-50% range.
Right.
Yeah. So I think we set the first example, and on corporate governance, I believe that we set an example also. So I think TSMC did begin to acquire a different meaning in Taiwan as a corporation.
Yeah. So tell me, I think Jensen alluded to